Fiore, and I've had the opportunity to invite Antonio through a common contact in New York, because I was looking for an opportunity to show an Italian film, a recent film. And when I reached out to Antonio and Fabio, because we have to say that he's here representing also the co-writer and co-director of everything that he has worked on, he said, well, these dates sound very good, because the film Sicilian Ghost Story is actually opening at the Quad around the same days. And I had no idea, serendipitous development, and here he is. And thank you to Susan Skog in particular. We've been able also to organize it here at the School of Communication and Media. So I thought about introducing Antonio to you a little bit in terms of his background, and then perhaps look at both aspects, the Italian cultural, social, political aspect, but also obviously had anything that has to do with filmmaking more specifically. So both Fabio and Antonio are from Palermo, from Sicily, and which is a place that plays a very important role in their films. They produced in 2010, they directed Vita, a short film. In 2013, Salvo, a feature film about mafia as well, and organized crime, and a Sicilian Ghost Story in 2017. And all these movies have received great attention nationally and internationally, gathering all kinds of prizes and awards. And we're very pleased to see in particular the response of the media in these days, from the New York Times to NPR, you name it. They've all embraced this film as a divine one, even. Now, your trajectory and that of Fabio is very interesting, and I thought that it could be of interest in particular to young people to hear what you've studied and how you got to film. Especially because you also teach sometimes, and you're very involved with Fabio in actually providing feedback to young writers. Fabio and Antonio are writers and directors at the same time. So.
Right after this trip to New York, I have a lab in France with a group of young filmmakers who are developing their first feature film, and so I have in my bag, I have their scripts, and I will give them feedback. It's something, it's our side activity, and but we love to do it.
Tell us a little bit more about your trajectory then.
Yes, it's. I didn't want to be a film director when I was a child.
What?
No,
What do you mean?
Actually, I didn't know what I wanted to be. It started. It's a very peculiar journey, because I was studying law. I studied law,
Wow.
but it's all related. We were talking about it while we were coming here, but it's all related also to what was happening in Sicily in those years, because I was a young guy in the 80s and in the 90s, which for Sicily is a very traumatic and violent period, because it's the period of the so-called mafia wars, and it's also in the 90s the period where the criminal organization was openly challenging the Italian state, with many killings of well-known people, journalists, politicians, public prosecutors. And this, it was really a massive situation. Imagine in terms of numbers that during those years we had more killings than the civil war in Ireland. It affected the life of all of us. We were all pretending to live in a normal, officially normal European civilized place, but actually it was a place where very, very violent things were going on. And why I'm saying so? Because in a way it all starts from that for me. Because I had a strong rage, a strong feeling. I started to have a critical distance between me and the world around me. And a feeling, a sort of, it was necessary for me to do things about it, to tell to the others. It was, I was at the beginning even involved in political, social movements. It was a very conflictual period at that moment. And it's Sicily up till the 90s, it was like living in a totalitarian society, because the presence of the criminal organization was massive. It was a really situation without freedom, it's a sort of living in a state of denial, an endless state of denial, where there were people denying the existence of the criminal organization, but generally speaking, we were all thought to be indifferent. And from that, at first I became a journalist. I was working for a newspaper, I was working on television. So I was starting to tell reality, I was starting to have, there is a first storytelling approach. I knew that it was not my final, I wanted to write, I didn't know how and why, and also I wanted to escape. I wanted to go away from that place. And I went to the north of Italy. It was a master, post-degree master in narrative techniques. That was the official name. And it's where I studied, among other things, screenwriting. And it's also where I met Fabio Cassadonia, who is my co-writer and co-director with the movies that Teresa mentioned. And from that, so I understood that the fictional approach to it was my approach to it. But still, if I, even now, after so many years, why do I do this? It's because I still find that feeling. I reconnect myself with this feeling. Obviously now it's changed, it has become something else. I have a more relaxed relationship with Sicily, because also working there, making films that let you discover people with talents, people helping you making movies, people who are there and resist, good people, honest people who are there and resist and have an honest, decent life. So that changed a lot my relationship with the place. But still, if I have to see why I'm making movies and why I'm telling stories, it's connected to the way, how I have experienced all those years, and to my childhood, to what I've lived. So yes, it's not a typical
Trajectory.
trajectory for a filmmaker, but when we were just writers, screenwriters for a long time. At some point, when we wrote the script of our first feature film called Salvo, we realized that in order for the film to exist and to exist the way we wanted it to be, we needed to direct, and that was the start of our career as directors too. The film had a very good journey, and that was the start of everything.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So you work with a partner. I'm curious, can you talk a little bit about how you work together? Particularly, I mean, I know a lot of writers work together, that's fairly common.
Yes.
It's less common for two filmmakers
Absolutely.
to direct together.
Yes.
So how do you work that out?
Yes, for writers, it's true that it's very common, and I think there is a reason, because you need exchange. It's very important. Also, it's very conflictual. It's actually the moment where Fabio and I have a lot of fights. We always say to each other, "I will never work with you again. I don't want to see your face again."
Until tomorrow.
Yes.
Tomorrow at 9.
Tomorrow at 9.
Directing together, it started because we wanted this movie to happen, and okay, let's do it together. We made the short film together, and it worked. We found mysteriously our own way, and it works. What I think is not a coincidence, the fact that directing together is for brothers. There are famous brothers.
Coen brothers.
Yes.
Fabiani brothers.
Because you have to share not only the artistic vision of the project, you need to share more. You need to share a sort of the way you see life, in a way. The sort of social and anthropological approach must be very deeply rooted in the partnership. And it's like that for Fabio and me. It works. We come exactly from the same, even from the same neighborhood in Palermo. We had our fathers had the same job, and it works. We have a sort of we prepare a lot. We prepare a lot together. The brainstorming goes endlessly on until we arrive to the production, and during the production we reach the set every day before all the others with the director of photography, and we decide the shots, but a lot is already decided and already discussed previously. And when we actually say action, there is a separation, because Fabio is more active with the actors, is more in the set. I am more in front of the monitor, but it's just what you see if you don't know how it works, how it really works between the two of us.
Now that makes sense. I've heard that sometimes it's one director will work with the actors and the other one does more with the camera.
All they have, all the stories are different. The Tagliani brothers that Sofia was mentioning, they say that sometimes there is one directing a scene and then the other brother direct the following scene. For us, obviously, that never worked, but yeah, you find, you have to find your way.
The other question that I have, and you'll probably hear it again during the Q&A, but it's really, really important, and it's a bit of a two-part question about Sicily. For those of you who will have a chance to see Rita, which by the way is on online, so
yes.
it's a 20-minute short. otherwise Salvo. You will see that Sicily is always represented in their films. On the one hand, because of the interest in these specific facts coming from the socio-political context, in particular related to organized crime, and on the other, because of nature. There's a really strong presence of the environment, whether it's flora, fauna, but even in some cases there's a glimpse tonight of a monument and urban architecture, including some beautiful shots of abandoned industrial architecture in outside a small town in Sicily. Now Sicily is so highly connoted, right? There's nobody who cannot make an association in their minds, right? When we say Sicily, it's a really large island, but after all, it's pretty small when we think about the entire globe, but everybody can really have some kind of link, right? And some images, as you know, are very much linked to violence, right? So can you tell us how you can work with material that has been so used, overused, abused in some cases, and yet attach to it both a new language and at the same time remain faithful to the stories of violence, of repression, of death, that are the very first ones that everybody thinks about. I teach a class called Italian Americans in Film, and students always say there's so much crime in this series of films, and yet you and Fabio are doing something very different with it.
Yes, being Sicilian and wanting to direct films set in Sicily, questioning two issues was crucial for us. The first issue was how to portray Sicily, generally speaking, how to play with the Sicilian image to avoid cliché, to avoid stereotypes. And the second issue was mafia, how to deal with it, also considering the tradition of cinema and TV series about it. And we have our personal answer to that. And Sicily is for us is like a continent. It's represented an entire universe. Well, I don't know what kind of image, if you live here, what kind of image you have connected to the world. But even if I ask it to Italian people, maybe the first thing would say the sea. In terms of landscape, I mean, the sea, the yellow color, the dry land, the yellow Baroque churches and monuments, maybe the old Greek temples, and anything which, for example, the color is yellow, and you will see tonight that the main colors of Sicilian Ghost Story is not yellow, because Sicily has also an inland of forest, which will play a very important role in Sicilian Ghost Story. There is a volcano, which is the highest mountain in Europe. There is snow. So all this kind.
That's interesting. I know.
The highest volcano in Europe, and one of the highest mountains in Europe. There is snow, even during the good season. And if you collect all these elements, it helps you. Also, not talking about myself, but talking about making movies, generally speaking, it helps you to questioning even the landscape, even a very well-known and already very often used place, but you can find your angle to to make it original, to make it specific, and that's what we are trying to do. To discover another side of this universe, to avoid stereotypes, unacceptable stereotypes. And even for Italians sometimes it's bewildering it, because they are, even them, they are ready, they want the same cliche to be repeated all the time. And you present a different side, and it can be bewildering, but at the same time it gives the possibility to come to be here and for the film to have a life, to have something to say to other people around the world, to make it universal.
You're making me think of Leonardo Sciascia's famous expression about Sicily as the metaphor of the world, which may sound a little bit arrogant, but it's interesting because he really wanted to propose a look at this continent as you're describing it, to really inquire into issues that have to do with human existence, relationship with nature, relationship with power and institutions, and in that respect he had an amazing intuition, and you seem to be following right along that path.
Yes, and about Sicilian Ghost Story, we have thought a lot about one of his sentence, which is he was speaking of the irrational part of the living in Sicily, and he said that Sicily is all a realm of fantasy, and the only way to deal with it is with fantasy. So it was like an invitation to have a different approach, and mafia is obviously a big issue, also because even very recent and successful Italian TV series dealing with criminal organization, for us, are very problematic. The point is how to portray these criminals. Obviously, there are many risks that you run. One risk is to romanticize, how do you say, their figures, to turn them into epic figures. And it all obviously starts with a masterpiece, which is The Godfather. But the Godfather is a masterpiece, is a piece of art, and it's about the family. And but it create a dangerous myth. Imagine that when the soccer Palermo team is playing at the stadium, at the soccer stadium, they play the music of The Godfather.
Really?
The film is very famous inside the criminal organization because they like to think that they are like that.
The Sopranos.
Yeah, The Sopranos. No, it happened too. No.
Do you think those films in particular have become so romanticized and famous because they're about like people like that they try to find humanity in these characters, or do you think people more prefer like the sensationalized epic proportions of these organizations?
It's obviously there is the bad guys are interesting. You can't deny it. and it's the film is really like an incredible modern Greek tragedy. So I'm not even at my, I'm not criticizing the Godfather itself. I'm more, for me it's an issue what happened after it.
Just the stereotypes
How
Yes.
it perpetuates.
Yes. And so this is a risk, and it indeed something that we are trying to avoid, also because there is a sort of banality of these people, that the banality of the evil of these people. In stupidity, I would even say. And in our two feature film, we have tried to give, this is our angle. They are very banal and stupid, very minor figures, like the criminal organizations is very vile and not spoiling the film you are seeing tonight, the story, but you will see how the role they play. It's a real story. It's inspired to a real event. We will talk about it after the film. But what's impressive for us was not just the cruelty of it, but the incredible stupidity of their behavior. The grotesque stupidity. And that's aside. The other is, and it's also the other risk you run in the so-called message movies or engagé cinema, the French say, is to portray the victims as in a sentimental way, in an over-sentimental way, and this is a risk many TV fiction about mafia victims in Italy run, like where the world is divided between the bad guys and the good guys, and while actually the problem is that there is a large gray zone between the two. There is the zone of indifference, is the zone of economical interest. So that was, it's an issue, and I know that even when you are making a movie in Sicily and there is you put a camera like this, and there is always a guy that comes driving a scooter, and like the production is trying to answer, not another movie about mafia. And
We get that in New Jersey.
they are right and wrong at the same time, because it's true that the overwhelming power of criminal organization in Italy is still there. And so what do you do?
Can I ask
I
another
know it.
question? I'm just curious about, you mentioned The Godfather, I'm curious, what are your other cinematic influences? What are films that you learned from when you were studying and writing screenplays? Like, what are films that influence you visually?
The Godfather I mentioned because of the mafia.
Right, but I mean-
Yes. We love. We are in love with. We are cinephiles. I admit it. This scene. And for example, for the film you are seeing tonight, we had a couple of major references. Was an old Japanese film. The original title is called Ugetsu Monogatari. I don't know the English title. It's directed by classic Japanese master Mitsubishi. It's a ghost story. It tells the love between a human being, a man, and a spirit, and the spirit is trying to drag him into her world, which means that in a way is trying to kill him. And it's incredibly poetic, and it deals a lot with nature and water and fog. And that was a major influence for us. And the other is the only film ever directed by Charles Lawton, The Night of the Hunter.
Yeah.
It's a film we love, and we have
Good job.
studied it, and it's a very interesting film in our specific case, because you will see this story tonight is the story of two kids, and in the film there are two children escaping from this serial killer.
Robert Mitchum,
With-
yeah.
with love and hate.
Yeah, right.
Brian's Knuckles.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Shelley Winters too.
Yes.
Shelley
Yeah.
Winters, like under.
And
Yeah.
Lily Gish.
yes.
Right. Yes.
And
that's right.
and the other interesting film is connected to the other interesting thing for us in this film is connected to the character of Lillian Gish. She's the narrator. The film starts. You will see, the one of you who are not familiar, you will see that the film, which is telling the story of these two kids escaping from a serial killer, very simply putting it. But the film starts with Lillian Gish, who is telling this sort of fairy tale to children, and they're in the sky. And then the camera goes down, and if the camera finds Robert Mitchum, who is driving the car. And Lillian Gish, at the beginning, is just telling the story. It's like a narrator. You would think it's like a narrator out of the story, but no. You will find later she's a character. She will give these two children hospitality at the end. She will save the kids. And if you start to think how the film, it's very interesting. Sometimes in our meetings with the students of cinema, we analyze this film scene after scene, because the way it is structured, it's layered. Nothing is for granted in that film. There are many layers of narration. And that was our main influence. We love, if I have to say, it's also, if I have to say my main reference and director, Roman Polanski and David Lynch.
But a lot of Japanese film
Yes.
as well.
Would you tell me the name of that Japanese film you just told us about?
The original title is Ugetsu Monogatari. The spelling is Ugetsu.
Okay.
I thought that it would be also interesting for the students to hear a little bit about the film industry in Italy, which they may not know that much about. On the one hand, we have such important moments in history where Italy was a foundational place. I think neorealism, I think the 60s, names that again are absolutely fundamental to understand international film as well, from Fellini to Antonioni. The more contemporary period has been a little bit more complex, in part I think because of the changes to the industry. And recently Matteo Garrone and Paolo Sorrentino have emerged as names that represent Italy, but belong also to perhaps more with Sorrentino than Garrone, to an international scene. And knowing that some of the films that you make with Fabio are also the results of collaborations across borders, because Italy is part of the European Union, and many films for a long time have been made with funding coming from different sources. So if you can illustrate a little bit this sort of scene that is national and yet at the same time international, and also touch upon something that you just mentioned, which is the relationship between film and TV, which is something that we have seen in this country as well, this transition from the traditional studios to TV productions that have changed quite fast. And interestingly, when we were talking the other day, you were telling me that, especially as a reader of so many scripts, you see how much TV has also given the chance to good writers, right, to come up with pieces of literary quality even. So just tell us about your experience in Italy.
It's a good moment for the Italian industry. It's coming after many years of crisis, because we had those golden days of the past, where in Italy, in terms of numbers, there were even as much as film produced as much as in Hollywood. And they were called it the Hollywood by the Tiber.
The Tiber, yeah.
The Tiber. And also a lot of American production were working in Italy, and that was giving a lot of space and money also to the big Italian masters of the past to have finance for their film. This world at some point collapsed. There are many. There is not one reason why it happened, but at some point it ended. Now it's starting again. There is a lot going on. There are many new international acclaimed filmmakers. What you probably don't know, because obviously the US industry is the strongest in the world, but the only, if you exclude China, which is another case, but the only countries where is in the world where there is a strong domestic market for movies produced in the country are Italy and France. Italy and France have a domestic market. Italy for domestic market for Italian films are around 30%, which I don't know how it sounds for you, big or not. It's very big, because imagine that in Germany, which is the leading economy of European Union, the domestic market for German movies is very low. It's like less than 5%. All the rest is made by Americans. Italy and France have two strong cinema industry, and obviously there are years that goes better than others, but generally speaking, it's a strong. And now with the TV series, Italy is becoming sort of a European center of the production, because we had a couple of success. One is Gomorrah, which is a TV series sold all over the world. It's more than 80 countries, I think. And because of that, Italy has been chosen as a sort of center, point of reference in Europe for all the production. And there is a very strong attention at the moment by all the players that you know very well, like Netflix, Amazon, the others, for Italy. And on one end, to produce local TV series that are put on the platforms mainly for the local audience, but also for the the big audience all over the world, but also to produce international TV series. So there is a lot. It's a good moment. Matteo Garrone and Paolo Sorrentino were the ones, thanks to their success at the Cannes Film Festival, were the ones putting a few years ago, putting Italy back on the map of cinema made nowadays, and that was helping everybody else, including Fabio and me, to make movies and to have to build production. The entire system of production is different from the one we have here, because in Italy, in Europe, we have also public support to the production, the so-called soft money, and which is helping a lot. The French system has been helped a lot by this. Now we have a similar law. Basically, the law says that all the taxes of the tickets you sell stay for the business. Basically, they don't go to the big. Like you buy a cinema ticket, there is in the price you pay, there is a big percentage of taxes. These taxes don't go to the general Italian big tax amount, but they stay for cinema. And it's helping a lot. It's helping also distribution a lot, because the law helps also distributors, cinema theaters. There are good sides and bad sides of both systems, but France and Italy they are leading countries of cinema with the United States.
It's good to hear good stories about Italy, given the general instability
Yes.
politically or economically.
Yes.
But culture has always played a fundamental role, and obviously film has been part of that culture in very prominent ways. Now, I want to underline the fact that Antonio, as you can see, speaks English fluently, and that, of course,
That's why.
allows people to enter the international scene. Being bilingual or trilingual is something that opens up doors. When we were talking the other day, he said we really realized that thanks to the knowledge of another language, we could actually make films in a different way, because we could be part of many more communities. So that's a little reminder from the point of view of also a language professor of
Because many
the-
films in Europe are co-productions.
Exactly.
So you need to pitch your film to people not speaking your language, and English is the language you have in common.
But at the same time, obviously, other languages and other cultures allow you to have that richness. Any comments, any curiosity, Matt?
Just in terms of like an overt creative decision-making process, like when you are making these films in Italy and you are getting the public money, do you feel like it affects the decisions you're making on set, or do you have a general 100% free creative freedom, or would you at times prefer a private investor? How does that work? Because I'm not really sure how the public money goes, and what are the things you have to say in your pitch, or the things you have to make clear in your process.
It depends. It depends on what kind of films you are making, and also it's very much up to you. Obviously, it might have an impact. There are also there is also private money, private investors. They use. If you invest in movies, you have a tax reduction. It's honestly you are free. You are free. it doesn't, it almost never happens nowadays, obviously, now that there is a politician or something saying, oh, no, you shouldn't do it. If the subject of the film is very controversial, maybe they don't give you the money, well, but it must be really something really controversial. I mean, something really questionable. It's very rare. It's very rare. It's very rare. They judge. They judge the script. They judge your work. The production company you are working with, the international prospect of the film, and there is it's strange to say, but it's not a corrupted process.
And do you usually get 100% of your funding from that?
No, it's I tell you, for example, for Sicilian Ghost Story, there is a big chunk which is not public. It's coming from television, where private. So there are television investing in your film, which can be Italian, French. In our case, it's Sicilian Ghost Story is a co-production of Italy, France, and Switzerland, and there is the Italian television and the Swiss television put in money, and they are considered private investors. Then there are the investors putting money because of the taxes reduction, and there is also the public fund. Public fund can come from, there can be national, the official Italian Ministry of Culture fund, but it can also be local. For example, in our case, the Sicilian Film Commission gives you money if you shoot a film in Sicily and you spend there at least 4 weeks. And actually, for them, it's a good business because they give you a certain amount, but they force you to stay there. So you bring a lot of money in on the territory because you hotels, local people, you have to take local people, restaurants. So basically, in our case, the money we were bringing to the territory was like more than 3 times the money that we got from Sicily, the Sicilian Film Commission.
That's great.
So I've interned with the New Jersey Film Commission, and in New Jersey we do like a tax credit system that was like recently passed. So depending on the region in Italy, there's a specific amount.
Yes.
They're allotting based on the production.
There is a?
There's are they giving you an amount back on the production, or are they funding it directly?
No, they are giving it to the production, and they don't. They are not taking any money back.
Oh wow.
They are
Direct funding.
Yes, I know the Italian expression. Honestly, I don't know how to translate it in English. It means a fondo perduto, which
Yeah, because there's no money back. It's a direct investment. It's a direct investment, and they don't have any profits either.
They don't have any. The public institution give you money. I mean the local, the ministry. Yes, if the film. The public national fund, if the film has a box office result, they have the money back.
Because you're boosting the local
Yes.
economy. Okay.
For the local money, they don't have the money back. Even the film can be a huge blockbuster everywhere in the world. They don't have the money back. In any case, as I said, you bring money there while during the production.
that's there. Okay, Patty.
And I have to go to a meeting, so maybe I'll just allow. To change the subject a little bit, when I first went to Italy, I was so surprised that serious films were dubbed and not subtitled. And then after I spent more time in Italy, Italians who love to criticize themselves would tell me, oh, Italians are too stupid to read subtitles. And I would think, what? And they would say, we're lazy, we don't want to have to read while we watch. And then I discovered later that actually it was about the control that the dubbing industry has, in this field, and that it's almost nepotistic in terms of how people get jobs, and it's not easy to change over a system that's been established like this for 60 years. I was just interested, when your film comes here, we all assume it's going to be subtitled. We don't have a dubbing industry in America. I'm interested in, A, how you would feel, and if there are countries that that your film might be distributed to that it would be dubbed, how would you feel as someone who created something that then, is really transformed in many ways through dubbing? And also, if you think there are any inroads in Italy towards the idea that certain serious films might not be dubbed in the future. It seems like it hasn't changed in many
It's
years.
a controversial issue.
I know.
No, obviously I wouldn't feel good knowing that the film is subtitles. Also because as a viewer, I tend to avoid the dubbed film. So I try to go to the theaters where there is the original version, even if they are distant from home. I try to, or I watch many movies home just because of this, because I refuse now to hear the fake voices of especially if the film is in English. I find it very disturbing. But even I prefer a Japanese movie we're talking about. I prefer, I know all their strange expression, like I'm used to that. Even I don't understand, but I prefer to read the subtitles. And yes, Italy is dubbing a lot. Germany is also dubbing a lot. The fact is that the original version, they are less successful. So everybody.
So you think it's just a commercial consideration? It's not that the people who control the dubbing industry have power?
It's commercial because most of the audience, they want it. That's the awful truth. They want it.
Because they're used to it.
Well,
They are used to it. And I know that even among educated people, if you, let's go to watch a movie which is with subtitles, they are resisting again. And it's very difficult to change. It's a very slow process. It's already in Rome, in Milano, you get
There's usually one cinema that's dedicated.
Yes, but in Palermo, for example, in Sicily, you don't get the original version. Very seldom you get to see the original version in movie theaters. So it's difficult to change it, and even the big Hollywood studios don't want to change it because they know that the dubbed version is more successful, and so I am afraid it's going to stay like this. It's,
which is one of the reasons why Italy is also so monolingual, because we know that circulation of other languages is very much related to film consumption.
Yes.
It's not the only one, of course, but at the same time, I think the fact that there are so many emerging cinema industries around the world, it will be impossible, I think, for Italy to really handle all of them. And so at some point, we will see a growth.
imagine that all, if you done on Netflix in Italy, all you have on Netflix is dubbed.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. This is
Of
what,
course.
I know that
the
you,
opposite here.
Yeah.
Of
here's
course,
subtitles.
of course you can change.
there's
I
my
want.
brilliant friend right now that everyone is.
I want
watching right now.
original with
Yeah,
subtitles.
subtitles.
It's your choice. It's there if you want, but most of the people watch the.
You know, in
the dubbed
China,
version.
Chinese films have Chinese subtitles when they're in Chinese. right? Like, so if you go to a theater in all Chinese films, they have subtitles.
In Mandarin.
Yeah, in whatever, the same language, because people like to hear and read at the same time.
Because they have many different
Dialects.
yeah.
Can't
Which is the
use-
case in Italy when you have
Sicily.
production set in Naples or even in Sicily, and very often they end up in having titles. Chris?
Yeah, speaking of that, I'm just curious to know how hands-on you were with the translation of the film as well, because we have a subtitling class here, and it's from translating film and seeing how the meaning changes between the translations, and when you have an idiomatic expression or something that doesn't, it changes your film.
Yes, we try to control it. It's obviously English is easier, but when it comes to the French version or the German version or the Japanese version, how can you control it without? You have to trust.
Right, you're translating.
Stanley Kubrick, they say they was checking every language. They say that he was checking the Italian dubbing. And all this. Unfortunately, I don't speak German and Japanese, so it's difficult. And even with the English, I have some issue with the English subtitles of the film, to be honest, all because it was made in a round to arrive to Cannes, and I have a few issues there. Yes, you lose something, obviously. You lose it. And all the dialects, there is the local saying, and yes.
We've been focusing a lot, actually. Thank you, Chris, for mentioning that on titling. And as a matter of fact, you mentioned Netflix, who's been probably one of the most one of the strongest proponents of titling projects, hiring people left and right, because obviously they're handling a really large amount of audiovisual production, or whatever that is. Unfortunately, the quality check there is an issue, especially because they give very little time and sometimes not enough money, for sure. But it's an aspect that we're really privileging in the study of Italian, and students seem to love it because they actually apply the language immediately. They can see a final product, and in the process they learn about vocabulary, syntax, but also about the specifics of that project. And so it's not a generic dialogue, it's not a generic text they're working on, but it's something live, whether it's an interview or a short, for example, or an ad. And it has proven to be a really great way of acquiring a foreign language and providing a service, because most of the things that we end up entitling with the guidance of professors end up actually on, in theaters, help movies circulate more, and certainly the students are brought to all the different nuances, the subtleties. And you're a little bit of an exception, because we've learned over the years that not too many directors are so interested in the subtitles and making sure that they make sense for the movie, and they just don't see how much they can impact the distribution of the film and the success of the film, but it's really part of the fabric. So perhaps we can conclude with a suggestion you may have, especially for young filmmakers. I know they come from a very different background and very different experience compared to the one that you just described. One thing that really strikes me about the work that you and Fabio do is the incredible attention you pay to all the different aspects of the production. You were talking about this long preparation and brainstorming about everything. What does that mean, and what kind of value does it have in a hyper-accelerated society like the one we live in today?
If you want to make a good film, there are many, yes, there are a lot. there are a lot of material produced. But if you want to make a good film, if you want to tell a good story, you have to be obsessed with your work.
It's true.
That's true.
It's, that's also, it's an obsession, and that's also what makes personal life complicated, because not so many, it's difficult to share. If you live with an obsession, it's difficult to share it with someone else. And, but it is an obsession, and it must be an obsession, and it's a responsibility, because telling stories is a powerful tool, and it's a big responsibility you are taking, and if you want to be honest, you have to be honest with yourself first of all, and telling something which is important for you. If it's not important for you, it's not important for anybody. So telling stories is
It's a task.
yes.
Obsession, in a way, is the theme of the movie we're gonna see in half an hour or so. And I really like this concept that you have introduced, because it can become a little bit pathological, but it can be incredibly poetic at the same time. And that's really the story of Luna, whom you'll meet in the movie shortly. Thank you so much,
Thanks.
Antonio.
Thank you.